where we find Olin Kreutz. Good morning, Olin. How are you?
Kreutzy.
Morning. Good morning, guys. How's it going, man?
Doing well. Busy week up at Hallis Hall. The Bears are making big news, Olin, and you are the guy who a lot of people have been waiting to hear from. So let's just start there. After having days of back-to-back trades for Jonah Jackson and Joe Thuney, what's your reaction to how the Bears have attacked this offensive line problem?
Obviously, you pull up a chair a little bit and see what the Bears are up to. And Ryan Poles is going after guys who have proven on film in the NFL that they can play in the NFL, that they can make the blocks that are required to get the Chicago Bears to where they have to go. And they throw assets at this offensive line, which we've talked about a lot, that when are you going to start putting money into this offensive line? Jonah Jackson, really good player from the Lions when he was there, right? Joe Thuney, a guy who carries a lot of respect around the NFL. Anybody you talk to, really excited about this guy leading the Chicago Bears, the kind of football player, the kind of man he is to put in that locker room to show guys what winning looks like. So it's like reassuring to me, guys, that the Chicago Bears say, look, we have a problem here. We have to put guys into this offensive line room to get it moving in the right direction. Let all these guys compete for all these jobs that they have there that are open to protect the young quarterback who took way too many sacks last year, whether it be who you blame on those sacks, him, the offensive line. I think they're both responsible for that. But just to see Ryan Poles go out, get guys like Jonah Jackson, like Joe Thuney. It's exciting for the Chicago Bears and their fans. We know that this offensive line needed to be fixed this offseason.
One of the best parts about Joe Thuney, Olin, is his durability. He's missed 2 games in the last 9 years. Is that just luck, or is that part of professionalism as well?
I think you know the answer to that, Grody. That's professionalism, right? That's a guy who gets his body ready for the season. That's a guy who, even though he hasn't missed a game, I'm sure he's played through some injuries. He's played through some things that a lot of guys wouldn't play through. So that's the kind of guy Joe Thuney is when you put up those kind of stats where you've only missed 2 games, right? And then obviously he's played in a bunch of Super Bowls. He played in a bunch of playoff games. He knows what it looks like. He knows what winning looks like. Now you have a guy sitting there in your room who guys stand up and they watch him and they say, okay, this is the way a pro carries himself. This is the way a guy acts who has been successful in the NFL. He starts to set the standard, starts to set the example for these young offensive linemen as far as every day taking care of your body, every day showing up to work, showing up to walk through, taking everything seriously, concentrating, guys, on the things that the Chicago Bears players talked about so much last year, concentrating on the details, concentrating on little things, concentrating on getting your culture moving in the right direction. A guy like Joe Thuney can help with that a lot.
Olin, for historical context, it doesn't always apply, but sometimes going back, it does. You have an example where it does kind of fit. And I wonder if this is one of those times. In 2004, new coach Lovie Smith, his first offseason, heading into his first year, they went out and they signed John Tate from the Kansas City Chiefs to an offer sheet. He was a restricted free agent, I believe. They structured the contract so the Chiefs couldn't match it. John Tate comes and was the anchor to an offensive line that had some good pieces, but maybe he helped stabilize that offensive line in a way that it wasn't before. Do you see a parallel there? And how important is it maybe for an offensive line to have that one guy that is as dependable as Joe Thuney seems to be?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about that offensive line, right, David, and you talk about how many guys Jerry Angelo actually hit on, right, that came in and helped us. You talked about John Tate. Great football player, man, and like you're saying, solidified the left tackle position for us for years there, and just the kind of guy you're talking about. Came from the Chiefs, a lot of success in that offense in those days. The Priest, Holmes, and all the guys, Gonzalez, and all the guys they had there playing for the Kansas City Chiefs. And then you talk about Reuben Brown, right? And then you talk about Roberto Garza, and then they signed my good friend Fred Miller in 2005. And that offensive line was a very, very good offensive line, guys. And we talk about and Reuben and Fred, both 32 years old, right? Both a little older. And John Tate would probably be more of an example of like Jonah Jackson, still in his prime, still a young guy who can go out there and dominate football games, right? Go out there and physically oppose his will on other teams. So they get 2 guys there kind of in a different part of their career. We understand Joe Thuney is coached by Dante Scarnecchia out there in New England, and then coached by former left tackle for the Chicago Bears, Andy Hecht, out there for the Chiefs. 2 really good coaches. The thing you wonder about with Joe, obviously, is he's only played he played with 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks, right? That helps, obviously. But look, his pass pro tackle is really, really good. His film is really, really good, guys, when you watch the guys play. And then he moves to left tackle for his team. We know he's not a left tackle, man. He goes out there, fights every week, does whatever his team needs to win football games. The 1 year he didn't have a Hall of Fame quarterback, obviously the Patriots went 7-9. So it's not only Joe Thuney who fixes everything, right? You got to have all the pieces to the puzzle to win football games. But like we're talking about with Roberto Garza, with Fred Miller, with John Tate, with Reuben Brown, you start to add puzzle pieces to the puzzle and you hit on them. And this offensive line gets moving in the right direction. It's just good to see them throw assets into that room, a little bit of money into the offensive line room and see what shakes out.
I am glad that you would consider Fred Miller a good friend, first of all.
Of course.
I just wanted to make sure that I got that out there. What else, Olin? Is this enough? I mean, you get Joe Thuney, you got Noah Jackson.
No.
Okay,
No.
or Jonah Jackson. Tell me more.
No, it's not enough. I think you keep adding assets to that room. Look, you almost had to, there's the positive side to these signings, right? We like that we went out and got Joe Thuney, a guy who can show you what winning looks like. Ted Washington did that for us, back in 2001. We signed Blake Brockermeyer for the Carolina Panthers. There's another guy, free agent, went and got Reuben Brown. Showed us a lot about what winning looks like. I'm glad you got Joe Thuney, but you almost have to manufacture the culture. You almost have to manufacture these guys, bring them from other buildings and put them in your building, right? Darnell Wright can learn from these football players who are coming in to show you how to be a pro. So no, it's not enough. You got to get young guys in that room, guys that you develop. Chicago Bears guys who have been here their whole career, who can help you down the line with your culture. So you keep bringing in, keep adding pieces, man. Keep putting assets into that room. You never know what hits, what doesn't hit. Remember, Roberto Garza signed for only 1 year. He had that knee problem. The Baltimore Ravens tried to sign him, right? He failed the physical. We brought him here. Chris Ballard vouched for him. Chris Ballard, the Colts general manager. And then he became a good Chicago Bear, a legendary Chicago Bear, a really good football player. So keep adding guys to that room. Keep getting guys in that room who can compete for jobs. I think Howie Roseman, you guys might know him, he won the Super Bowl this year. He said you can never have enough O linemen and D linemen in your building. Keep putting guys in that room.
Talking to Olin Kreutz here on the Score. Mark Grody in for Mully today. Olin, if they were to ask you your advice about what direction to go now at the center position, if you had A, draft a young guy, put him between two veterans and let him see how that works. B, go out and overpay Drew Dahlman in free agency, because that's what happens in free agency, and that's just the reality of the NFL. But to get a guy as stable as he might be, it would be worth it. Or C, stay with Coleman Shelton now that you have a guy that has experience in Chicago, in your building, and might be respected by the offensive line. A, B, or C, which would you lean toward?
Yeah, you go out there and you have to fix that center position also, right? And you can't have everything, obviously, in offensive line room. But I would lean towards a younger guy with the two guys you just got, right? I mean, Dahlman, it depends what Coach Rochar wants. When he turns on the film, Coach Rochar, now the Bears offensive line coach, when he turns on the film, when him and Ben Johnson sit in the room up there at Hallis Hall, and Ben Johnson asks him, Coach Rochar says, what do you want here at this position? Do you want an outside zone guy? Do you want a power guy? We're coming downhill at people. What do you want on film from your center, directing traffic, getting guys moving in the right direction? Now you got Joe Thuney there. He can help with that. He can help guys get guys on the right blocks. Identify who the offensive line is working to, who the running back is working to, who's coming, who's hot. All these things you got to work on. I would like to see them get a young center and maybe also bring in a veteran center, like when the Bears drafted me and I sat behind Casey Wigman for a year and learned a lot from Casey Wigman about how to be a pro, how to study my book. I sat behind him and really needed that year to learn. Talked about Cam Jurgens. He just did that in Philadelphia, right? The Eagles just did that with him. I sat him behind Jason Kelsey for a year, played him at right guard, and then he started, and then they won the Super Bowl with him at center. So keep adding guys to that room, David. Maybe you get both. I don't know if you have the money from Dahlman. I don't know if with the inside side 3 now, you might want to get an older left tackle in there too, a guy who's well respected around the league, a guy who can block people, with the injuries you have at the tackle position. So much uncertainty in this offensive line room. I don't know if you can ever say this year, oh, that's enough. We're good to go. Here we go. Get him on the field, right? Jonah Jackson they just gave him a bunch of money to go to the Rams. And you worry about, okay, why they let him go so fast? People are dying. to have guys who block people in their 20s, guys who are 28 years old. I love Jonah Jackson's film there in Detroit, but it was between Frank Ragnow, an all-pro center, and Taylor Decker, a very good left tackle. The sum of the parts on the offensive line is always the most important thing. Nobody on the offensive line is good by themselves.
There is nothing more ridiculous than anybody thinking to themselves, yeah, the Bears are good on the offensive line. They're fine. They signed these two. They got Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson. They're good. So that said, I'm taking a jump ahead here because let's just say you got Thuney, you get Jonah Jackson. Let's say they sign somebody maybe not as significant as those two in free agency. Olin, at number 10 in the draft, are you about offensive line there as well? Do we continue to pile on there, or do you go defense here? And I know, and we're all allowed to change our minds here, but at this moment, what are you thinking about that?
I think at number 10, you take the best available player, right? I always think in the first round, guys, in those early picks, man, you got to take a guy who you know is going to be a Chicago Bear for 10 years. You got to take a guy, a difference maker. You got to take a guy that you really like there, who Coach Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles look at and say, this is the number one guy on our board right now, where I think they have 3 picks in the top 50. So they have picks to get there, to get guys in that Chicago Bears. But obviously, you know me, guys, if I'm in a room, I'm arguing for the number one offensive lineman on the board, right? I'm going to put him, and that's all you're going to hear from me. The only thing you hear from me if I was in the Chicago Bears is somebody run power O and somebody draft an offensive lineman. Let's sign more offensive linemen. Let's keep building that room up. But in there, when you are in charge of the whole football team, you have to do what's best for the organization at Chicago Bears. And when you're sitting there at 10, you got to take the absolute guy that you know is going to be a Chicago Bear for 8 to 10 years and help you win a lot of football games.
You make a great point about Jonah Jackson in Detroit. He did benefit from playing between two really solid, above average, become dominant offensive linemen. I wonder, now that you have him in the mix, he had played left guard. He had experience at center, didn't go so well with the Rams. And with Joe Thuney here, maybe he is a guy you plug in at right guard. How difficult of a transition would it be to switch sides of the ball if you are Jonah Jackson? And do you think that he is a possibility at center?
I think Jonah Jackson is a possibility, David. I think that's why the Rams maybe didn't like what they saw from him, because they put him at center, right? So I think you put him at left guard and you forget about that position. I think you put Jonah Jackson there, young guy, has showed you that he can play left guard. Like I said, man, I loved his film when he was a free agent. I was hoping the Bears might take a look at him when he came, when he left the Lions. But now he's here as a Chicago Bear. I think he's 20. I think he's 28 or 29 years old. Plug him in there. Plug him in there at left guard. That's what you know he plays well. Joe Thuney has showed you, man. He guy played left tackle. I think he played a little right guard. He probably could play center if he wanted to. I think you put him at right guard and you figure the center position out. But I wouldn't mess with Jonah Jackson too much. I think he's a left guard. I think you put him there, you leave him there. I think that's what his film says. I think his film last year says that he's probably not a center. Remember now, when he played center last year, he played for Matthew Stafford. And Matthew Stafford does what? He makes all the calls. He identifies everything. He tells you who's coming. He tells you who's blitzing. He tells you who you should be blocking, right? So if you struggle at center with Matthew Stafford, I do worry about moving him to center a little bit with Caleb Williams.
The acquisitions, Olin, of Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson actually get me more excited about guys like Karan Amagaji, because now there's breathing room and maybe not the expectation, although there should be expectation considering he was a third-round pick. Where does Karan Amagaji fit in all of this? And do you see a future for this guy, not only with the Bears, but in the NFL from what you saw last year?
Yeah, young football player who moves really well, right? Got great feet for his size, got great arm length, has a lot to learn about football, obviously. Where does he fit in? He fits it in the room, right? You put him in that room, he's going to be here. You drafted him just last year, right? He's got to develop his game. He's got to get his strength back from that quad tendon injury he had in college. He's got to work through that, get power back in the league, get on Coach Rochar's radar, talk to him about what you think you have to improve on, how you can get your game better, find guys to watch on film, keep improving your game, and add yourself to the mix there, right? So that's where he fits in right now, where he is competing for whatever job you have open. And he could probably play guards and tackle positions, but right now he's just got to get his body right, get strong, get healthy, and then work on your technique. And then when you get to camp, you're ready to compete for whatever position they want you to compete for.
Olin, you know as well as anybody about the dynamics in any NFL building, but especially Haugh between the head coach and the general manager. When you have a new head coach making what Ben Johnson is making, $13 million a year, the assumption is that he's got all the clout. He's going to be the most powerful man in the organization. What did these moves tell you about the working relationship between Poles and Ben Johnson? Is this, on one hand, you've got a guy that played for Ben Johnson and Jonah Jackson, and they went out and identified him, and they got him. And on the other, you've got Joe Thuney, who Ryan Poles was familiar with in Kansas City. But let's face it, I don't think you have to have that connection to realize that Joe Thuney is all about winning and a guy that is worth trying to get. What do the last 2 days tell you about the relationship and working rapport between those two guys?
It tells me they sat down and said, we got to get some things fixed in this room right here, right? They watched all the film, poured over it, put Coach Rochar in there with them, probably called Coach Rochar in the office and said, look, we got to fix this offensive line. Take a look at these two guys. I think their working relationship, David, like you're talking about, is this is what I think needs to get fixed on this football team. How are we going to get that done? Let's go out and get it. Let's go out and pour assets into the offensive line room, get this thing moving in the right direction. Let's get a young guy who has shown that he can play at a Pro Bowl level, and let's get an older guy who's still playing at a pretty damn high level, who also knows what winning looks like, who can help us lead that room, who can help everybody moving in the right direction for what winning actually looks like. And Grody knows better than anybody. Those players talked about that a lot last year, right? Whether it be on the 50 million podcast they do or every time they did an interview, they talked about how the coaches weren't holding the standard, keeping them moving in the right direction, concentrating on details. That's what we heard a lot about. Put a guy like Joe Thuney in that room, and all of a sudden you got a guy who says, look, this is what it looks like, though. I know we can talk about it, but this is exactly what it looks like when a football team is heading in the right direction to win football games. Guys playing a lot of Super Bowls. It just tells me, David, that these two guys were in lockstep in that building, that the offensive line needed assets in that room to compete for the jobs that they have.
Should the Bears have 7 captains again this year, Olin?
Well, if they can get a few O linemen and D linemen in there, it'd be nice. So you can have 7, but let's get a few linemen in there, a few guys who, I always say, guys, the farther you get away from the football, the farther you get away from football, right? So those guys out there, the receivers and the DBs, when they talk and they do all those kind of things, that's because they don't really have to hit everybody on every play. The guys in the middle, man, the guys in the box.
Yeah.
Those are the guys that you want leading your football team, the quarterback, the middle linebacker, the center, the tackle, the nose guard, the defensive end, the defensive tackle. Those are the guys you want leading your football team every day, showing them what things look like.
Before we let you go, Olin, quickly, I always wonder every year during the Combine what you think as you observe it. What do any impressions left by this year's Combine, and how much stock do you put in the underwear Olympics, is what Dustin calls it?
It's always interesting to watch the drills and the things that everybody's doing. I always think to myself, these guys are amazing athletes. I'm sure you guys think that too. Some of it seems like a waste of time. I know the medicals are extremely important. It's good to see all the guys out there competing, running. I'm always just mostly, David, amazed by the athletes that a lot of these guys are, and the fact that even though they're athletes, some of them won't make it because there's so much more to making it in the NFL than just running and jumping and doing cone drills like you guys know. I don't have to tell you guys that, but anything football, I'm very, very interested in it, and I always enjoy the Combine, seeing those guys compete at different drills and the way they work and the way they go through things, and just seeing, guys 6', I don't know what they are, 6'7", 340 running 4.8s and 4.9s. Just amazing to me.
Olin, we got to run here, but really quickly, if Joe Thuney was to do a podcast, would you listen to the Joe Thuney podcast?
Every day with Thuney. I would, because look, I do radio, I do analyst work, and it would give me something to talk about. Like, Grody, when you're doing radio, when you're doing a 4-hour pregame show, anything helps.
Oh, anything helps. Absolutely.
Tuned in with Thuney. There we go.
Boom. I like the way you guys are talking.
Olin, thanks a lot for your time. Great insight.